good to be back in front of you again. Can everybody hear? All right, what I'm going to present to you was the 4.25-hour presentation we gave to the contractors, an abbreviated version which we did meet with the Community Day, although it was a little short notice. We did meet with the Regional Development Corporation and the Regional Coalition of Land Communities, and I think we had about 18 people in attendance. That was about 2 hours for the meeting. I'm going to shorten that into about a half hour, running you through what we had presented and kind of updating you where we're going from where we had this presentation to where we are with the issuance of the final draft that would be issued in August. And then we'll leave time for questions and answers, and I would expect you've got quite a few, so you've already had a few. But I'm not going to go through every page, but I'm going to highlight a couple of things. The only difference on this, do want to go through and talk about the purpose. We did want to get as much feedback as we could. And we had almost 800 comments back on the draft RFP. So from our perspective, it was a very successful pre-solicitation conference and draft RFP. We currently are starting with a bridge contract. It's a 2-year contract, period of performance, $310 million. That gives us a good jumping off from where we were under the M&O to where we are with a completely new and open competition contract for a total of 10 years of EM cleanup performance that aligns with the fiscal years. We did release it on May 26th. I want to point out just that we are carefully considering all of the comments. I can't tell you how many hours we have spent working on this. Since we started getting the comments in, let's see, that would have been June 24th. We have multiple teams, both in the field, here at the field office and in headquarters, both in Cincinnati and in DC, trying to resolve some of the harder issues that were underlying on some of the contracts, and I'll point those out. The final RFP is anticipated to be issued in August, the end of August of 2016, so just over a month from where we are now, when we expect to roll it out. We do have a website if anybody wants to see any of the materials. We are posting new materials several days each week where new drawings go up, new files go up, new references go up as we're able to go and get them reviewed. So the procurement website that you have in your presentation, you can always go back and take a look at what new material is going there, and we have had a substantial number of documents posted on the website. And there's a copy of the website. All right, where we end up with is we are planning on a 60-day, once we issue the contract, we have a 60-day contractor proposal period. It's short. We are also in competition with 2 other sites that have contracts about a month before ours and a month before that. One contract just came out, so they're planning on issuing another one in the next couple of weeks, and then ours will follow. And you've got a very tight sequence where a lot of contractors are going to be competing for a lot of work. This is full and open. We are planning on taking the proposals as submitted, making the evaluations, and awarding without discussions. Kind of some legalese on that. If we have discussions, we end up inserting another time period in the schedule, and we don't have the time to afford that before the end of the bridge contract. All right, a couple of things to point out. We had talked about transition being a 90-day period. It was originally in the draft as inside the 5-year base period. We have now gotten approval. We will have a 90-day transition period overlapping with the current lands bridge contract, and then we start a 5-year period of performance. That now puts us in alignment with the federal fiscal year and our budget cycle, and it puts us in line with the annual work plan process under the new consent order. So now the contractors will be able to make commitments for the entire fiscal year without having to worry about a 3-month period at the end of it. All right, a couple of things that were of significant discussion, both in the contractor sessions, the one-on-ones, and the community day, talking about a small business subcontracting fee reduction. I do want to let you know these provisions have been changed. We have taken the comments on how much small business we are using to heart. The percentages for small businesses are up, and the requirements, and we'll get to it later as one of the other clauses about the prime contractor self-performance, are no longer limited as long as they meet the small business goals. So we are not going to tell them what portion of other contracting that they can have with large or small business. We are going to be specifying how much small business we expect. All right, did want to go and comment. We get into a couple of sections where we had the performance work statement. There were a lot of provisions we had on the contract that did draw comments. The performance work statement had a lot of comments, but they were a lot of editorials, there were a lot of clarification questions. The scope that we had outlined to be performed during the 10-year period of performance did not significantly change. One of the things we are doing, though, is recently we have been able to realize quite a bit of savings on the Lands Bridge contract, and we have accelerated some of the work that we had outlined on the draft, and it's now going to be performed towards within the last year of the bridge contract. So we've deleted a couple of paragraphs, but it didn't make a whole lot of difference in terms of the 64 pages of technical scope description. I'm not going to go through the next couple of pages, which are just some drawings that we had for the contractors to bring them up to speed. And you guys have had these briefings quite a bit, so we did talk about this. This was just the outline. Contract transition, we did talk about 90 days. One of the items that is due is the contractor human resource management plan. 90 days is extremely aggressive for us to get all of the contractor human resource activities done so that on October 1 of 2017, the new contractor can step up and perform work with the right employees and the right skills. There is another item that is required, and that is the plan for the assumptions of permits and memorandums. It's one of the other more significant transition issues. We are currently having some discussions, and it has not been settled, on whether even the RCRA hazardous waste facility permit that NNSA and the M&O contractor right now own, in terms of expanding that to a co-owner, co-operator. We're trying to figure out what the best mechanism for that is. So right now it is, if necessary, you shall become a co-operator. But right now it's a little soft until we negotiate with NNSA because they're the owners of the permit. All right, one of the primary things that we are going to be putting in place with the award of a contract is a contractor performance baseline. This is their proposal for technical approach on how they're going to accomplish everything within that 10-year remediation portion of the contract. That is what we will use each year to either modify to align with the consent order or have the consent order proposed annual work plan based on what we can get out of the contractor. So there's this symbiotic relationship here that we are going to be managing. The other thing that we had, and this was a significant comment area from all the contractors, was interfaces. Interfaces with the M&O. They're here. They're the operator owners of the site. We are going to have to work with them on their facility for cleanup. So we have been providing a tremendous increase in the level of detail when it comes to those interfaces. We've been having discussions weekly with different groups to figure out how those things are going to work, from storm notifications, emergency management and hazmat response, how we're going to work with IT systems, how we're going to work with some of the software, some of the procedures, other things that we have to use if we're on the laboratory. So we are trying to tighten all of that up, and it's been a significant effort to try and do that. One of the things, safety program is a big thing. The new contractor will have to put in place a safety program that can stand up on its own, and then make sure that when they're inside the laboratory portion where the M&O currently owns, they're going to have to make sure that our safety program complies with their safety program. Nuclear safety, of course, is a big issue. We had quite a bit of discussion on Cat 2 and 3 facilities. We are going to broaden that a little bit because there are contractors that have commercial experience or other agency experience and not specifically DOE EM experience. So they can bring NRC experience and come work here without significant change. All right, we talked about compliance with permits. This was a big topic of discussion. We talked about the Haz Waste Facility permit and some things that are being considered. But all of the other permits they will have to comply with, or they will have to pursue their own permits to do the work. Infrastructure. This has been another topic of some very interesting discussions. EM doesn't typically own much except for maybe well pads, wellheads. Well, we put it in on the landlord NNSA M&O's property. We have to negotiate who's maintaining it, but we are going to be maintaining all of the equipment that we need. All of the facilities that we need, we will make sure get maintained so that the facilities are safe to conduct operations. Some of that will be shared with the M&O, and it's in the interface document. Others we will be doing ourselves to make sure it's done to our satisfaction. Not going to go through the map. I think you guys have seen that quite a bit. One of the comments that we had, the transuranic waste handling on this contract is limited to the contact handled both above grade and the retrievable below grade waste. We are not going to be retrieving remote handled TRU under this contract. That doesn't mean that there's no work scope. We have written in that we have to go and support the information necessary for the department to go and develop whatever plans we need for the next contractor to go do that. So this contract will provide those resources for it to get us ready, but they're not going to plan on retrieving any of the RH-TRU.
So David, just a point of clarification for the CAB members, that means they will not be retrieving the 33 shafts, correct?
That's correct. That is not currently on the contract scope. However, if the contractor is able to go and accomplish all of the remediation work and all of the contact handled work, excuse me, sorry, in an abbreviated time frame, doesn't take the full 10 years of period of performance, we have a provision on the contract called an IDIQ CLIN. It is indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. They're task order based outside of the scope, something that we can't tell you right now that they have to go and do. So there is a mechanism whereby the contractor, we can get them to start work on a new activity such as RH-TRU or facility modifications to support it. It is a possibility that if they're good enough, we can accelerate some of it. However, with the interfaces with the WIP, I don't think our shipping schedules are going to be supportive of any significant acceleration from approximately that 10-year time frame. All right, one of the big questions they had when it came to the transuranic waste, the current safety basis documents. This entire contract is based on using the extensions and development that is currently within the basis of interim operations that we currently have authorization for. There are other efforts outside of this contract to develop an EM-specific documented safety analysis and technical safety requirements. They will not be available on day one, but we would provide that later as a contract change. So we backed out some of the language that you had seen in the draft and just concentrate on, we have the current bio, we have the current TSRs, we have the existing safety of the situation ESSs, we've got our existing PISA system, the, what do they call it, Lee? The potential, no, the PISA? So there are several things that will result in some changes to the current safety basis that they will have to operate to, but in no fashion are they to plan or propose to any new DSA that DOE might develop in the interim. All right, waste management across the site. I didn't have a whole lot of comment on that. There was discussion about newly generated TRU waste from the M&O. Inside Area G, part of the contact handled TRU, is newly generated waste that was after the 1996 date, right? 9 date. And there is some portion of that that we will handle because it's in our facilities. That is what we consider part of the contract scope. If the M&O develops some new contact handled waste that is not currently on the contract, it's a negotiation between EMLA and NALA on whether and how and when we actually take that scope. We all work for the same Department of Energy. This is another activity where we could use that IDIQ CLIN to go and say, here's a new chunk, but it's not currently authorized. All right, back to some of the groundwater stuff and some of the remediation activities. Same activities that we're doing now in terms of the interim facility groundwater monitoring, we're continuing. The groundwater monitoring programs for Los Alamos County wells, the County and City of Santa Fe wells, the Pueblo de San Ildefonso groundwater wells. We're going to be continuing the sampling of all of those under this contract. All right, we have drilling. I'm not going to go into that, but we do have a separate section. Surface water monitoring. We are currently on an administratively continued individual permit for stormwater. Hopefully, sometime in August, the EPA will issue a new one. Right now, the draft says you have to comply with this one, and then when we get the new one, if it's after the draft, we'll deal with it as a change. If it comes out prior to the draft, we'll quickly revise the current language to the new IP and put it up on the website so they can actually propose to it, so there won't be any loss on the individual permit program. All right, corrective actions, the same thing. We did talk about it. That work continues. RDX Groundwater. Again, this continues. The activities that we're starting now are all included in the scope. Chromium, one of our favorite subjects, one of our worst problems. This will continue. They have to pick up where we leave off, and they will have to go and complete the studies and write the corrective measures evaluation to give to the state to consider what the final remedy might be. So we're still at least over a year and a half away from providing this CME to the Environment Department so that they can make that consideration. One of the other subjects that we have, town sites, the historical properties. This is where we get a lot of the county input, the private property ownership issues. That is one of our highest priorities. We have accelerated these activities on the bridge so that what this contractor will have to do is clean up the residual paperwork, maybe finish some 1 or 2 sites, but there's not a whole lot there that's going to be continued on this contract. Risk assessment, field cleanups, we will be doing these in terms of the campaigns. One of the campaigns that we have under the consent order is the known locations of contaminants. That cleanup is starting now, and it will continue into this contract period. Aggregate areas, we are going through. We have the same list of aggregate areas on this contract. The work will be continued, and we did not get a whole lot of comment back in terms of what's being done in each individual aggregate areas. We did a bit of a clarification for quite a few areas, rewrote some stuff to be a little more clear, but there wasn't any substantial addition or deletion from this area, with the exception of what we took off because it's authorized under the bridge contract. Material disposal areas. 7 areas requiring remedy. Going to point out a couple. Removal action for the general's tanks is within the contract. So is the characterization and the remediation, whatever the state determines is the appropriate remedy for MDA A, Material Disposal Area A. We are going to be looking at that in conjunction with Material Disposal Area T, which you know is the absorption beds and the shaft disposals. All right, Material Disposal Area C is one of those central to the laboratory. It is going to be one of those that we are going to be focusing on in the next few years. Finish a couple of other campaigns and then move over to MDAC. So it's one of the big environmental projects that the contractor will have to perform relatively early in the base period. Oop, I think I went too far. MDA-AB at TA-49, still have to go and complete those investigations and finish the remedy. The MDAs at TA-54, we have revised this section. As we recently committed to the Environment Department, we are going to withdraw the remedies from MDAs G, H, and L. Right now they're 4 years old. They would at least need to have technologies refreshed, the approaches that may change over the next few years. This contractor would redo and resubmit corrective measures evaluations for the MDAs for GH and L, and that way give the department more relevant, probably in the 5 to 8 year time frame under the contract, so that we've got new information that might come out of some of the environmental laboratories, give us a better shot at having a better remedy identified. So this contract will finish those CMEs up, even though the construction projects of whatever remedy is chosen are not expected to be within this 10-year period. All right, the end of it, the contractor is going to have to transition to the next contractor, but that was pretty benign in terms of comments. I'd already talked about additional assignments. These were the task orders. Going on to interfaces, there are a number of systems that we are not going to spend our money duplicating. What the laboratory M&O has is the right tool to use, and we're going to make our contractor use it. We already talked about emergency management. Hazmat was the example. The compliance order on consent. When we had the briefings earlier, the final consent order, 2016, was not issued. Now we have a brand new consent order. The contract has been stripped of reference to the draft, and everything has been rewritten to the new consent order. I'm not done with all of the attachments yet, but I'm getting close. Individual permit for stormwater, I currently mentioned the same thing. It depends on when it comes out. DOE does still have DOE radiological regulatory authority under the Atomic Energy Act. This contractor will have to go and develop those documents and submit them in a package for us to go and do our part for those sites that are driven by RAD. So this contractor will do all that also, no change. And then other environmental permits is a big issue, but we're working through that. My presentation had a break, but I got a short time frame here, so I'm just going to move on. All right, the period of performance. It was a recent decision to take the transition period out of the base. This is actually going to be 123-month contract, start to finish. Let's see, I'm going to skip a couple of pages. Contractor's transition plan, the implementation of the human resource management requirements. I mentioned that they were going to be significant. What we have to do is comply with the department policy that if you're in, you're in. Those employees that are considered incumbents now, that are picked up by the new contractor, will have to have comparable benefits to what they have now. So those that are in the old UC program that rolled over to lands would then also roll over to us. So it's that same sort of keep them in, keep them in. Anybody new that they have to work with under their technical approach to the work, if those skills do not exist now and they have to bring them in, market-based retirement plans. So it's not going to put new people in old plans. All right, I'm going to go through a couple things. Those were just some of the introductory stuff. When it comes to the workforce transition, this is not a formal transition of workforce. The technical approach defines what skills they need. If those skills are what is provided or currently available through the bridge contractor, they get first right of refusal. Anyone that lands might have in maybe a gap between what the M&O needs and what the new contractor needs might be considered at risk, so to speak. They have a first right. We have to go and have the new contractor consider them for any maybe close skill sets that they can possibly tweak up. So the current workforce will be looked at specifically by the new contractor. And then throughout the period of performance, even if they don't hire them right off the bat, if they want to come back later, they can still go back to that pool of people and pull those resources if they find they need more people. All right, we talked about comparable plans to lands. One of the things that drove some changes in the RFP was we were written explicitly for the contractor had to provide a comparable plan. It's not so rigid. Now it's going to say a comparable plan or become a participant in the current lands plan. Lands has graciously gone and offered up an opportunity for us to explore if we can make the employee testing and everything else that's required on the plans. If it works, they may be allowed, and I can't stress that enough, may be allowed to go and be rolled into the current plan. We're exploring that. All right, so what we expect to have, benefits plans for incumbent employees, and I already mentioned the non-incumbents, the new employees. And we are spending an extraordinary amount of effort trying to resolve this with NA headquarters, NA field office, and the lands contractor is just being brought into it now because this was a difference between both EM and NNSA that was driving some of the differences in those provisions. All right, let me get to a couple of the other relevant slides. We've already had quite a discussion there, and I appreciate your comments on the community commitment clause. Doug and I have had conversations about other ways that the contractor will want to go and comply with strong commitments to the community. None of the contractors are going to want to be looked at as not serving the community that they're drawing their workforce from, where they're located, the business relationships that they follow. So we are going to have other discussions on how well they are performing their community commitments. It is just not one of the factors that we will use in the evaluation of the contractor's proposals. That is the current position. So that's what we're writing it to. Regional purchasing program, this also got a lot of discussion, but this one's pretty easy. We're keeping all of the 5% preference for northern New Mexico businesses. So that is staying exactly the way it is under the M&O. Key personnel, standard clauses. This was the self-performed work clause that I had discussed. Even though this was written 65% self-performed, 35% contracted, this clause is effectively gone, and all we have is a small business goals clause. So we'll tell them what percentages they have to meet and evaluate them for it. All right, we'll go through some of these others. I wanted to make sure I got a couple of things pointed out to you. Where we go? One of the things that we have talked about, there was a lot of discussion about what constitutes the offerer. Limited liability, whether it's a corporation set up just for us, whether it's a teaming arrangement, whether it's a subcontract arrangement. We really don't care how it works. One of the things that we do have, though, is down at the bottom of the page, critical subcontractor. It's up to the offerer to determine what they consider critical. However, discussions with the potential offerers, they understood that quite well. They've already got a concept for what would meet this requirement, and it turned out to be more benign than what we thought it was going to be. We thought they were going to have a real problem with it, but that didn't seem to be the case. All right, going through some of the rest, this is just how they're going to put this together. One of the things we noticed the $4 million transition in fiscal year 17. That's the overlap between the bridge and the current contractor. We will make available whatever money the offerers propose such that they can make sure that the transition is adequate, well developed, and as seamless in terms of work performance as we can get. All right, here was another discussion we had. This is where the community commitment plan was discussed in terms of what we're going to evaluate. It does not currently show up on the list of criteria, so we are proceeding with this. But we did talk about it extensively, both headquarters, the CBC, and here, so it's not something that we took lightly. All right, and I think that's about it. There were a couple of other notes. I mentioned we had almost 800 comments. We had a significant elevation in the interface details that we have. We have a lot more concrete assumptions to level the playing field between the contractors I'll give you an example. The bioassay program that is conducted through occupational medicine, OCMED. We're going to be using the bioassay program that currently exists and enrolling our contractors' people in it. So that's one of those things that will go to the M&O. Now we've actually said how we expect to do that in the contract. I mentioned that there were very few scope changes. We are going to show all of the changes we made. We are going to be posting red line strikeout versions of the documents as well as the clean draft when we go final. Next week, we hope that we will have the final, or I should say draft final, that headquarters will be submitted for their approval to release. And then we expect it to go up live on the website towards the end of August, probably the last week. So I wanted to open it up to questions. I'm sure you've got quite a few. I heard a few earlier that I think you got good answers for. So what else can I answer for you?
Excuse me, a little protocol and questions. If we could start out with just maybe 2 questions for each member as we go around the table, so that we don't get too long on one individual and a lot of questions. And then we could try to come back to some of the other questions, if that would be okay with the board, to try to limit so everybody can get into the process so that if they want to ask questions, if that's agreeable. All right. Carlos.
Mr. Rose, I didn't, maybe I missed it, but I didn't see bonuses tied into the RFP. Is that not going to happen?
We actually have one of our appendices, our attachments to Section J, was a performance evaluation and measurement plan. It currently is structured whereby 15% of whatever negotiated fee that we talk about with the contractor, 15% would be based on our subjective criteria: quality, safety, cost controls, management expertise, regulatory compliance. Those were the 5 categories that feed into evaluating that 15%. That will be consistent percentage in each contract period, year by year by year. The other portion of the potential fee is based on 85% would be awarded towards milestones. Call them PBIs, performance-based incentives. This is where we would have incentives that align towards what we would expect to be the campaign level milestones, such as what the consent order contains in Appendix B. So the completion of a campaign may have a heavily weighted, significant milestone to it. There would be an incentive there that we would go and do. So between the 15% award fee subjective, there would be 85% of whatever the negotiated fee percentage was for incentive-based awards. If they don't meet the criteria, they wouldn't earn their fee. If they do meet the criteria, then of course they've earned all of their fee. Did I get what you want? And truthfully, we are still editing that particular attachment. I have not finished yet, so.
Carlos, could I just clarify? Was that when you say bonuses, were you talking about the fee structure, or were you talking about bonuses to employees and so forth? Which one of those? He described a fee process that the company earns fee. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it pertained more to performance above and beyond milestones.
Okay. So as a company level, not getting down to the individual people and bonuses.
Alex?
So your one slide that deals with performance overview, actually, when we talk about the different material disposal areas, you said that you're going to withdraw proposals for remedies on the for 3 areas, GH and F?
That's correct. We're going to withdraw those remedies. I'm going to write the letter this week.
And this is a 10-year contract. Are you withdrawing your remedies for the full 10 years? Or I don't understand what you mean by withdrawing the remedies.
We have submitted what we considered a significant level of effort that was a recommendation to go and take a particular remedy. If you remember, they were generally the evapotranspirative covers. A couple of them contained soil vapor extraction, some monitoring, long-term monitoring associated with it. What we are going to do is withdraw our recommendation that that's the remedy. That'll alleviate some of the resource constraints about having the Environment Department try and review a document that is, in G's case, more than 10 years before we can get to the program, get to the remedy project. There is no reason to leave those sitting on the street, either forcing the state to take any action on something that would need to be updated anyway, or on our part, let's pull it back, utilize whatever might come available from one of the environmental laboratories in terms of technology that may give us a better remedy. So we'll work on, let's say, MDA-H, over the next 5 years, and maybe by the end of the base period, we could then submit a brand new evaluation and a remedy recommendation to the state, but now we've got more relevant information for it. I would not expect to submit the other CMEs for L and G, because those are required for continuous operation through at least about 8 years. So if we submit it sometime just before that, then the state would have plenty of time to go and consider our recommendation. So we'll just withdraw it. Basically, it takes it off the street, and we'll start that process over again in terms of redoing the evaluation.
Okay, so
It's in,
Those areas won't be addressed under this contract, it's just that you're gonna withdraw it and repropose maybe within 5 years, or actually start within 5 years?
Oh no, I've actually required this new contractor. They will reperform the evaluations with the new information that's available on a date. And in the assumption tables that we have, section L of the contract, we have laid out the expected time frame. Starting our evaluation over again for area H is at the end of the base period, start of the option period 1. For area G, we said we expect them to start the evaluation over again at the beginning of the second option period, which would put it about 8 years in. So we've told them when we want them to go and redo that work.
the presentation I'll give after the break should help clarify so that you understand the timing of the scope as it's being performed and how it ties in with the contract. So we'll get to that, and you can ask it again at that time.
But with relation
To what was just said, so you review the option for the contract at 5 years, 8 years, and then 10 years?
We will
Or
issue
10 years you'll
we will
reissue?
issue the 5-year base. Within 6 months of the end of that 5-year base, we have to go and notify the contractors that we will be exercising the next 3-year option. And then at the end of that 8th year, halfway through it, we'll notify them of whether we're going to use the last 2 options. But the reason why we got driven to a 10-year period of performance was we don't think that the WIP receipt schedules will support us completing the contact-handled TRU much earlier than 10 years. If we get maybe year 9, 8.5, I think we'd be really lucky just based on the slow, methodical startup of WIP. They're not going to be taking a lot of waste until they try out these new formats, processes, and structures that they have. And we've kind of fallen to the bottom of the priority list. So as we negotiate these shipments, then we'll be able to do that. Nice thing is, some of the sites that ship TRU waste to WIP, they have shutdowns in the wintertime. They can't ship when it's snowing. We don't have that problem very often. So we might be able to slip a few in we hadn't expected to, but I don't think that the WIP startup schedule is going to support much earlier than 8, 9, or 10 years.
Thank you.
Stephen?
One question. One, you may have mentioned this and I just didn't hear it or see it. There didn't seem to be anything in here about the consent order and how that impacts this contract, or doesn't it impact the contract?
It impacts the contract tremendously. Right now, the Environment Department and EMLA are the custodians and owners of the consent order. The contractor has it as a contract requirement. Thou shalt comply with all the provisions in the consent order. Using the same process we've been using, it's also in the new one. The contractor will support us in developing the annual work planning process, whereby we sit down with the state in order to go and say, look, this is what we can accomplish within the next period with this amount of money. And the contractor brings their, I mentioned it, the contract performance baseline. They bring that to us and we sit down with them and we say, okay, these are the campaigns that you've scheduled. This is the progress you can make. We're going to identify these particular breaking points for Appendix B in the consent order, and then incentivize the contractor to go and say, okay, you told us this is what you can accomplish. When we write the next year's performance evaluation management plan, we're going to take a lot of that incentive information and then put money on it so that the contractor will be incentivized financially to deliver all of those campaign level milestones to the state. So it is inherent in what we do. And we wrote in those types of interfaces in terms of you shall comply, you shall assist us with the annual work plan process, and that way we can have both the contract and the commitments to the state aligned every single year.
One more question. Theoretically, under the current arrangement with Lands being the interim contractor here and having the other contract, you have some potential advantage and you have resources available to the contractor through Lands. Is there some way, they have a huge, they've got 10,000 employees and so on. Is there some way that, and this probably has just to be worked out, how these two contracts can interface so that if, say, Lands or whoever has another contract has a specific expertise that they wouldn't need a full-time person for, could that person somehow
Yes.
provide services to this contract under some other
The arrangement that our contractor would have with the M&O contractor is considered a subcontract. So they would have this arrangement that they could sign, which effectively is a new contract or agreement or financial commitment. We provide them with a charge code. They charge to our charge code, whatever their rates are, we pay, we get that expertise. In some of the areas that we have, and I'll use AirNet for an example, we have 3 EM stacks out of 15 stacks at the laboratory. I don't want to stand up an air permitting program for 3 stacks out of 15. Let the laboratory run it, and I'll go buy those services for those 3 guys, that are, or whatever number of people that it takes to monitor our 3 stacks. So we will do exactly that under this arrangement. There are some things we know about that we told them, you shall do it this way, and then the others are, we expect you to provide the best alternative for DOE, not just EM or NA, because like in the core facility, we drilled cores when we were drilling wells. We put them in environmentally controlled conditions. About 13% of that facility is NNSA's, and the other 87% is ours. But it doesn't make sense for us to split our stuff off and have 2 core facilities. So we told them, you shall work it out to go and do the most effective facility for DOE. So if it reduces NNSA's costs a little bit, but it only increases ours a small amount, it'd be worth it. So we told them some, but not all of it. But yes, they could do that.
Okay. Angelica?
Okay, I have a simple question. Why weren't the remote handled 33 shafts included in this RFP?
Very good question. With the challenges we've had on the contact handled waste, looking at how much work we can get done, you can throw more money at it, but you can't make any more progress. At some point, you are schedule limited in terms of what you can do. After you get done with the contact handled waste, before you can actually handle remote, you have to go and modify the facilities in order to provide either remote handling, shielding for your personnel protection, because right now it's too low a level. You can go walk up to it and touch it and not exceed any of your dose limits. If you handle the remote handle, the activity levels are a lot higher, and we could not go and operate it safely until we modify the facilities. So we could do all of the CH-TRU processing and have a nice break while we do facility modifications that would then allow us to go and do the remote handle, like the 33 shafts. But there's this facility construction thing in there that is so different than operating and processing CH-TRU that it doesn't make sense to have the nuclear operators go away and then do a capital construction project within the same contract. So that CH handling part, that makes a natural break. So if that's about 9-10 years, then we ought to be pretty good. And then the next contract, we can even go and do a facility modification capital project separately before we get authorization to do the RH-TRU. So we've got a lot of contract options, so we got 10 years to figure out. That's why we didn't include processing on this one. It's because of that facility construction gap that you had, and that probably is going to be about a 2-year window.
Okay, so then are you saying we shouldn't see any type of work being done on this for the next 10 to 12 years?
In terms of RH, I would expect there to be safety basis development, designs for maybe the new facilities that you have to put in. You're going to have engineering designs for facility modifications. The contracts for those take a lot of time. You can't just do it in a year. It might take 2 years to get design done and then to get the facility modified. We can work on the design part, but we can't do the modifications because I'm still inside the facilities. So I can't start the construction until I'm out of the facilities for CH.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
While you explain it, David, do I understand on the consent order, you have in here 2005, you're revising that to be 2016? That you're going to meet compliance?
As I said, this was the same presentation we gave to the contractors back in May. At
Right.
that time, the consent order wasn't even negotiated. We hadn't sat down with them at the table yet. It was still something that the state was trying to put their thoughts together. So when that presentation was prepared, it may have today's date on the front cover. That was the same presentation we gave to the contractors. The new contract, the final, the draft final, now only reflects the 2016 approved consent order. So all references to the prior draft are gone.
That's why I understood, okay. Just understood. The other thing, you talked about, in here about approval of key personnel.
Yes.
On part. Explain how that's going to take place, because do those key personnel, if they're approved, are they going to have to stay with this contract?
Yes.
For the period? And if they don't, then there's some
Penalty.
compensatory requirement that takes place?
What we have is, we have specified 4 positions that we would call key personnel. The contract manager, the person of authority. You got the program managers for CH-TRU and remediation, and I think it was the safety manager, quality assurance manager was the 4th one. Those are the things that we need, but they can propose 5 more. Any more than 9, I'm not sure I would consider them key personnel. Okay. We have provisions in there whereby the top person, if they leave within 2 years of the award of the contract, kind of like the bait and switch contract concept, we don't want to do that. If they propose a key personnel for that position, we want them to stay long enough where that contract is up and running and working right. So if they leave within the 2-year window, they lose $250,000 in fee. If the next tier down, the program heads, leave within 2 years, it's a $150,000 reduction if they leave. After that 2 years, we have to go and approve who is going to occupy those key positions, but there is no continuing penalty.
Okay.
So we get to review who they're proposing, and we get to concur with it.
But under the original proposal, they will give you like qualifications for those key personnel that they're going to be in there.
Absolutely.
And you're able to review that and approve those people.
That is criteria
Because,
number
like you
3
say,
in the weighting factor.
A
Yes.
lot of contractors give you that bait and switch type thing.
Not as many as you think, because they get a bad reputation when they do.
Well, I should say, some contractors do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have seen where they have had personal family medical issues and they go.
Okay.
But I have not actually seen them go and just decide to go somewhere else. That's not a typical practice.
Additional questions at this point? Do I see any?